I'm Sienna. I'm the kid.
I'm Sarah. I'm the mom.
This is Queer Kid Straight Mom.
Let's talk. Welcome back to Queer Kids Straight Mom. We hope everyone is
Doomsday edition.
the Doomsday edition. I promise it won't be that negative. We hope everybody's doing okay, doing whatever you need to do to take care of yourselves. My personal decision moving forward is that there are a lot of people that vote for Trump that want us to be miserable. Like they kind of enjoy, owning the libs. And the best revenge is living well, right? So we are just going to find the joy where we can and not let this get us down. Do the work. There's a lot of work to be done. I think there are a lot of lessons to take out of this election. But I think that we have to not let them feel like they beat us down. That's my take. So our topic today is we believe there is no such thing as being non-political. Now, quickly, I'm going to lead into this with a few things about this election because I think it's relevant. According to the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, or CIRCLE, voter turnout among young people ages 18 to 29 was 42% overall in the 2024 presidential election. It was higher, 50% on aggregate in key battleground states, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. As of this moment, votes are still being counted in some places. But as of this moment, it appears that youth turnout was lower than in 2020 and on par with 2016. Nationally, 52% of youth voted for President Harris and 46% voted for President Trump. That's a notable shift toward Trump in the youth vote. In 2020, he received 36% of votes from 18 to 29-year-old voters. So that's a big jump. We know that some of the gains that he made were with young men. There's been a lot of discussion about how that demographic has felt isolated by the left because of the emphasis on feminism and what they see as a lack of real masculinity. And Trump sort of fills that void as, to us, a nightmare male role model.
Because as we all know, Trump is the manliest of men.
Right. So brave. We also learned that although immigration fell third on a list of most important issues among young people, the young people who listed it as most important voted for Trump by a nearly 70-point margin. So obviously, this message about immigration has found an eager audience, which is interesting. These things aside, given these voter turnout numbers, do you think, and this is where this kind of leads into our topic for today, do you think some of the gains he made in percentages have to do with a lot of young progressives sitting this one out?
It's funny because I've been texting back and forth with Dad about this, and he's not convinced that's the case. But my feeling is that that's very much the case. I mean, right, that is what resulted in Clinton losing the 2016 election, is that a lot of progressives either didn't vote or voted for Jill Stein. PSA, never vote for Jill Stein. Even if you agree with her policy-wise, the fact that she's apparently just committed to sabotaging anyone who runs against Trump should be enough to tell you that she doesn't care about you.
If I were a conspiracy theorist, I would think she was a Russian asset. I'm not.
Yeah.
So
Anyway.
forget I said that.
Right. So we see the exact same thing happen again this year. And I think there have been a lot of things that have resulted in young voters feeling really sort of apathetic. And I personally feel that, people were really apathetic towards Biden, and then he dropped out. And there was a lot of momentum behind Harris, but I don't think that she harnessed it as effectively as she could have, or her campaign did. I think there was maybe a lot of emphasis on, courting moderates, courting, the people who listen to Liz Cheney, because that's a huge segment of the population, clearly. I think that got overemphasized, and acknowledging the concerns that young progressive voters had sort of went out the window a little bit, which I think was a fundamental miscalculation on the Democrats' part, because I think they were overestimating the number of moderates out there, or moderate Republicans, that there was a meaningful chunk of voters that they could have gotten, when it just doesn't seem like that was the case. So, as an example, I was canvassing for CI 128 over the summer in Montana, which is a constitutional initiative that protects the right to abortion up until the point of fetal viability in the state of Montana. And it did end up passing by approximately a 60-40 margin. And the turnout for that clearly was much higher. I think by, say, 2,000 votes in Gallatin County, which is where we live. And so clearly this was something that was really mobilizing a lot of young voters. A lot of people were turning out and voting for that, but not voting for Harris for president. And while it's true that there are certainly some people who might vote for that initiative and also vote for Trump based on like economic issues, that shouldn't be the majority of them, right? And when I was talking to voters in the context of the Senate race, I was hearing a lot of people say, yeah, I'm absolutely going to support this constitutional initiative, but I'm not going to support Jon Tester. Not because they're conservative, but because they're coming from the left and they don't think he's representative. So yeah, that was a lot, but I do think that was a major miscalculation made by the Democratic Party writ large.
Oh, so you feel like on, say, an initiative that people feel is an important change, like this is something we need to do, they're passionate about it, they're going to show up because they feel in that particular case like that represents their interests. But they don't look at Jon Tester or Kamala Harris and think that person represents my interests.
To an extent, I think it's also clear cut, right? You're not voting on the sort of package of issues that a candidate represents. You're voting on, do I support abortion access, yes or no? And I think that makes people feel, A, a little bit better about the vote, and B, also that they have more control, right? That it's directly representing their interests and that they're sort of cutting out the middleman.
Wouldn't it be interesting, total tangent, because sometimes that happens on this show. Wouldn't it be interesting if we just voted as a nation, like voted for policies a la carte, and the people that we elected are just the people that like, this is the person we choose to make those work, to carry those out?
I think that would be an objectively good way to go about a lot of things. It would be much more democratic. It would cut out some of the majority of people support Medicare, and yet they're also electing Republicans who are going to try to get rid of Medicare.
Right. Or like all the states that voted, like Montana, voted to protect abortion rights and then voted across the board in state offices for Republicans. Especially like in our case, in our state, Republicans that have been very, very, very clear about wanting to take away reproductive freedom for women.
As opposed to all the states where Republicans aren't very clear about wanting to take away reproductive freedom.
I think some of them are worse than others. Greg Gianforte, for example, our governor, is like a fundamentalist. Like he takes it to a different level. But anyway, yeah, we should just rule the country, I think. You and I, we got all the good ideas.
Yeah, there are some logistical challenges, right? Like if people decide that they want a truly terrible policy, for instance, mass deportations of illegal immigrants in front of people, the majority of the country supports it. And then you actually practically do that, and people are not going to be as happy about it as they think they are, right? So then do elected officials have an obligation to be like, no, this is a terrible idea? Like where do you draw the line on that one? And then also, if something requires a really fast response, and yeah. So there are logistical challenges, but in principle, yes, I think more incorporation of ballot initiatives on a nationwide level would be a good thing.
Just a thought. I've seen a lot of speculation that the Democratic Party is just making a huge mistake in trying to appeal to the center more, and that there are a lot of people that are just really frustrated by, I think, a feeling that like, okay, this isn't working. It's time to just go all in on more left-leaning issues and just go for it because that's what young people want to see. What do you think about that?
I think, yeah, well, it's certainly, again, I think young people felt like they weren't getting any acknowledgement that the Democratic Party assumed, oh, well, of course, young people will support us. Of course, Black people will support us. Of course, Latinx people will support us. And then didn't, until at least relatively late in the cycle, in some cases, Harris releasing a sort of package of policies targeting Black voters, for instance, right? But until really the last minute and in specific instances really didn't acknowledge that and were sort of assuming that these voters would be in their corner when they weren't necessarily, when they weren't inclined to go out and vote. And again, I mean, I fundamentally disagree with that. But yeah, I do think that that was a miscalculation that the Democrats made, that if they devoted all their attention to the center that they assumed exists, that they wouldn't lose out in turnout among young voters. And clearly that wasn't the case.
So all of these reasons for people not voting, obviously that's a little different than not being political. Like in some cases, people didn't vote because they're very political. But there are also, and young people that fall into this camp. I know people my age that fall into this camp that say, I don't want to talk about politics, or I'm apolitical. I don't care. Tell us how you feel about that.
Wrong. You're wrong. I don't. You're so wrong. It's, yeah. Okay. To be more polite about it, it's very frustrating because there's no such thing as not being political, right? If you make the choice not to engage, not to go out and vote, not to engage in discussion with the people around you, that also has a political impact. And every aspect of life that we participate in, from the foods that we do and don't eat, to the media that we do and don't engage with, to the products that we do and don't buy, all have political contexts and ramifications. It's literally just a matter of whether or not you choose to acknowledge them.
I mean, even the things you're telling your kids, if you're like one of these parents that's like, I hate talking about politics, but, you get all up in arms when your kids say that there's a transgender kid in their class or, whatever it is, like you are making a political statement and people don't seem to separate that in their minds. And maybe like if nobody were trying to take rights away from transgender people, if they weren't having to fight for, kind of equal protections and recognition by law, then maybe it wouldn't be a political issue. Maybe you're just I don't know, maybe that's like not liking somebody for having red hair. I don't know. But
although
else, because these representatives are trying to do that, it is a political issue.
One might point out that even the silly judgments we make about people based on hair color are still political, right? The reason that there's judgment and jokes about red hair is because red hair, like a lot of Irish people have red hair, and there was a lot of anti-Irish sentiment in the US for a long time.
Yeah, that's true.
The reason that people are judgmental towards blonde people is because of the stereotype about like brainless blonde women. Like, this is exactly my point. It's all political. There's no escape. You're stuck with it.
So even discriminating against people because of their hair color. I mean, I guess discriminating in general is political.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, when there's stuff on the ballot that a yes or no vote is going to actually change people's lives, like you are making a decision if you don't vote. You're making a decision that you're going to let whatever it is happen. And maybe it's because you genuinely don't care. Like, I think there are probably people out there that are like, I'm not homophobic. I have no problem with gay people. I have no problem with transgender people. I don't see why these have to be political issues. But by not voting to either protect those people or to like prevent discrimination against those people, they're making a political choice.
I may not be actively hateful towards you, but also your human rights are less important to me than a mild inconvenience of leaving my house to go vote.
I've always kind of liked that quote that, I don't know, it's attributed to this Irish statesman, Edmund Burke. But whoever said it, even if it wasn't him,
yes,
The only thing necessary for evil to triumph in the world is that good men do nothing. Whoever said it, it's a good point.
Yeah, I'm trying to think because I think there's another quote that's attributed to him about good men uniting against et cetera, et cetera. Not that I particularly like Edmund Burke, but they are good lines.
It's like the kid in class that like watches another kid getting bullied and is like, I don't really care. At least it's not me.
Yeah, it's very passive. It suggests that, as long as things are trucking along all right for you, like, who cares if the world is a better place or not? Which I think there are a tragic number of people in the world who are like that, which I just can't wrap my head around.
Yeah, like if it doesn't affect you, then it doesn't really matter.
Which, of course, the funny thing is that also politics do affect you. Like, everyone who was like, well, I don't like how the economy's been going, so like I don't want to support the Democrats. Like, y'all are gonna be so screwed by Trump's tariffs.
Who's going to tell them? Many of us Democrats too really struggled 2008 to 2010. That wasn't the Obama economy, that was the Bush economy. These things have a lag that I don't think people understand. Trump inherited a really good economy from Obama, and then Biden inherited his mess.
Right. And then the economy at this point in the year is actually just as strong, if not stronger, than it was during the peak of Trump's administration. And somehow it's terrible and Biden has destroyed the economy and everything's awful and Trump is the only solution.
It's fascinating that, I just want people to like read and listen and learn before they just automatically accept things as being true.
Just think for 2 seconds. Yeah, like when I would be, seeing these like profiles that a lot of papers were running about undecided voters or people who were leaning Trump, they'd say things like, Joanne from Indiana is leaning towards Trump because she heard he was better for the economy. Okay, who? Where did you hear that? Who is it?
Joanne, who are you talking to?
Was it Bob down the street who like waves his gun around every time a gay couple walks by? Or was it actual economists? Because the actual economists are saying he's a nightmare for the economy.
I think Joanne needs to turn off Fox News and go do some other things.
Exactly. Like Bob down the street has an ulterior motive.
Right. Cut out Bob down the street. Maybe befriend that like college professor next door.
Right.
Do you think too that there is, and I saw this with some people that in 2016 that did not support Trump, that thought he was a horrible person and just didn't vote or didn't get involved. People who like don't want to talk about politics or, whatever, really thought like knew he was a bad person morally. So they just didn't vote. Do you think there is sort of a thing that motivates some people to not get involved? That when that, like, they kind of want that person to win because it's their side. But if they didn't vote, they can say, I didn't vote for him.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And also, to your point about, maybe they don't like him, they think he's not a good person, but also they're clearly not understanding just how awful he is. I think that's another fundamental miscalculation that was sort of made by the press. I mean, really starting in 2015 with their coverage of his whole campaign. And it's just gone on for the last 8 years, 10 years. Like, oh, we have to cover him like we cover any other politician. We don't take any stance on him. And crucially, we have to present it as a balanced narrative. So if we write something that makes Trump look bad, we also have to write something that makes Clinton look bad or makes Biden look bad or makes Harris look bad. Because otherwise we'll be accused of being biased, which has sort of been the approach to covering politicians for a long time. But I had this conversation with a friend the other day that if you force balance in a narrative that is not balanced, you're skewing the narrative. Mm-hmm. Your responsibility as journalists and as newspapers is not to present a balanced narrative at all costs, because sometimes the narrative isn't balanced. And if you force that lens onto the reader, instead of simply presenting them with, you have one candidate who is a felon and a rapist and whatever else, and you have one candidate who's like a competent attorney general and vice president.
Yeah. Well, and by doing it, you're legitimizing everything he says then, right? So even if the media then points out that what he said was a lie, they've already implied that he is a legitimate candidate and he has legitimate points by treating him as such. So
Right.
then when you say that he lied, that looks like you're being partisan or biased or whatever.
Right. And it leads to the same, ironically enough, it leads to the same sort of phenomenon happening on both sides of the political spectrum, right? You have Republicans who say, well, all politicians are the same. He's just another politician. Like, you know, they're all crooked and he just says it out loud and whatever other excuses they make, right? Because you presented them as they're just both politicians. And on the left, and this again affects the youth turnout, it also legitimizes the narrative that all politicians are power hungry and no one really has your best interests at heart. And neither of these candidates is going to, you know, say fight for Gaza or fight for trans rights. And it's like, you may be right that neither of these candidates is going to stand up for Gaza or particularly be vocal about trans rights, but one of them is going to be actively harmful.
One of them tried to enact a Muslim ban.
Right. One of them has spent the last 2 months spending a third of his campaign advertisement funding on attacking trans people. The other just hasn't said a lot about it. Right. It's a false equivalency. And I do think it all stems from the press trying so desperately to maintain a facade of legitimacy in the eyes of people who were already never going to see them as legitimate.
Jeff Bezos is a really good example of our point here, our thesis. He said, oh, we're not going to do endorsements because this paper is nonpartisan. We're not biased. And like that was a political statement.
Exactly.
It was because so easy to see through that as like, you're going to gain a lot if Trump wins. You don't want to speak out. You don't want your paper to speak out against him.
Actually, I think it's even less that he's going to gain a lot if Trump wins and more he was afraid of what would happen if he spoke out against him and then Trump won.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's probably true too.
But
a lot to lose on one side and a lot of money to gain on the other. I mean, like Trump is going to cut his taxes if he pays any tax. I have no idea. He probably doesn't pay taxes.
Regardless, yes, it's like if he has stuff to gain by sucking up to Trump and nothing to lose by not doing anything for Harris. Unfortunately, because one candidate believes in freedom of speech and freedom of the press, she wouldn't retaliate against him.
Yeah, by disallowing them from endorsing a candidate. It was political. Yeah, totally.
Right. The fact that, I mean, and also I think this is a good time to bring up the unintentional political ramifications of speech, because like, let's be honest. Yeah, he very likely wasn't motivated by the fact that Harris was a Black woman in that particular, you know, shutting down the endorsement. It was, you know, absolutely about his bottom line. But also, if the first time in, 40 years that you don't let your paper endorse a candidate is when it's the first Black woman running for president,
yeah,
that says something, even if it's not what you intended it to be.
And he hasn't owned it the whole time, obviously. But he didn't take it over and say, by the way, we're no longer endorsing candidates. Like,
exactly.
They've continued to do it. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's a whole different kind of branch of this, that by not quote unquote being political, sometimes you are making an unintentional statement even. Like when you say that is not worth me getting involved with, you're basically saying that somebody is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder too if, I mean, obviously you grew up in a household that was really politically engaged and like for debate and just out of personal interest. Like, you know, a lot about presidents and candidates and stuff in the past. But I wonder if there's an element too of like it must be so surreal to have come of age in this era of politics. Do you think too there are just kids that like have become teenagers since Trump's first candidacy and like they're just looking at it like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. This guy can get elected president. This guy's running for president again. Like, I'm not participating in this system.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like, if you watch a system that's supposed to be, promoting the voice of the people, and you've heard all of these narratives in elementary school about how great the United States is and the democracy, yay, et cetera, et cetera. And then you actually start looking at politics and you're like, this entire system is just letting the most unhinged man on the face of the earth be in control of nuclear codes. Like, yeah, why? Why would I participate in that? What's the point?
I'm out. Yeah. Interesting. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but yeah, I could see why young people would just be like, no point in playing that game.
Well, and especially because there are so many other social things going on, right? The absolute lack of democratic representation in the Supreme Court that's, resulting in all sorts of horrible decisions being made. The massive public uprising surrounding Black Lives Matter in 2020 that really hasn't resulted in any material change being made. That, yeah, it doesn't feel, I think, to a lot of people like the US is living up to what it's supposed to be, and that it feels very hollow.
So there's kind of a sense of hopelessness.
And then if you see all of this happening, all of this lack of representation and the influence that money has in politics and the way that people are being, screwed out of their rights, that it then is like, well, you're telling me that Trump is this existential threat to democracy, but I haven't seen democracy working. I see a bunch of people being disenfranchised.
And so is there a sense that because we have no voice in this, we're just going to take care of ourselves and build our lives the best we can and just try to ignore what's happening around us? Like, what's the end game in that mindset? Or do people your age, are people your age just too hopeless to think that long down the road? Like, you don't expect us to still be here.
For some people, sure. I think there's an element of like, whatever, I'm just not even going to deal with this. I'm just going to focus on myself and my family or whatever. But to give credit where credit is due, I think that for a lot of people who don't vote on a national level, for instance, that the thought process is, my voice doesn't matter here. This is not a representative system. This isn't going to make meaningful change. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus my efforts on things that I do feel will make actual change, like grassroots organizing, mutual aid, that kind of thing.
Getting signatures to get bills on the ballot, right?
Right. And again, that's because that is a form of politics that a lot of people who, might not go out and vote for Harris or might not go out and vote for Tester, like they're happy to go out and get signatures for an abortion protection bill. So, yeah.
To wrap this up on a more positive note, because we could all use some positivity, what can we do? From the people from the analysis you've done, what would help?
It would be very helpful if politicians running campaigns would stop treating certain voting blocks as taken for granted. And I think that the way that we talk about political issues has to change a bit as well, instead of treating people as, you're stupid for not engaging. And I'll admit that I haven't maybe been the best at this in the last couple of days because I have been angry. I have been filled with rage watching people, try to excuse themselves for not having voted for Harris. But I do think it's important to, meet people where they're coming from and not treat them as stupid. And that goes for both the left and right, because typically people are making decisions based on their circumstances, based on their material circumstances, and they just don't have access to the information they need, or they've been misinformed, or they've been sort of sucked into something. But treating them in a condescending way, treating them as, well, how can you be Latinx and voting for Trump? You must be stupid, is not going to be effective, shockingly enough.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot of both the outreach and the dialogue that candidates and their campaign teams kind of need to revamp.
Yeah. And I think it's quite, again, as I've said multiple times, I do think it's quite clear that trying to appeal to moderate Republicans doesn't work, because if someone was still willing to vote for Trump after everything that happened, if they weren't immediately like, oh my God, no, there might not be a lot you can do to reach them.
So really all we could do was get more Democrats to turn out in retrospect.
It bothers me that that's the case because I think that approach to politics resulted in the polarization that makes that the case. So I think it's a never-ending cycle, and I think it's just causing us to spiral more. But yeah, I think that if Democrats want to win elections, that's the approach that they're going to have to take. And I don't know how you get out of that cycle.
Yeah, because it does. It feels like instead of like solving the conflict, we're just going to each keep trying to build bigger armies.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe that wasn't as uplifting as I was before. Because wild accusations and misinformation about gender affirming care were so rampant in this campaign season, next episode, we are going to talk about what that really involves, what the experience is. Sienna is going to talk a little bit about their experience, and we're going to help address some of the concerns that parents might have if their kids want to start some kind of hormone treatment. If you have any questions ahead of time, message us and let us know, and we'll try to address them. I don't even know really what to say except hang in there and keep having each other's backs, because that's what we can do right now. We'll catch you next time.
Bye.
If you found this podcast helpful, interesting, or just mildly amusing, please consider rating and reviewing us on your podcasting platform of choice. It really helps us to get the word out there and spread this information as far as we can.
And as always, check out our website at queerkidsstraightmom.com or visit us on Facebook, Queer Kid Straight Mom, Instagram at queerkid.straightmom, or Twitter at queerkidstr8mom.
And if you're feeling especially generous, please consider joining our Patreon by searching Queer Kids Straight Mom. It helps us fund this podcast.